Drew Camp, President and CEO of the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce, and we're here today for another candidate interview, this time with Senator Dan Dawson. He's running for re-election. Senator Dawson, thanks for joining us today.
Morning. Thanks, Drew. Thanks to the Chamber for setting this event up. I think typically in the past, we've always kind of done a little in-person forum with various candidates and the environment that we find ourselves in. This is as good as an alternative we're going to have to continue through this election cycle. So thanks for making this happen here.
Oh yeah, of course. We're happy to do it, even if it is from home. What is, as we kind of look into the questions, the first question is, what is the top issue Council Bluffs in Southwest Iowa is facing, and how will you address it if reelected to the legislature?
So the top issue that I believe we're facing, and that we have faced for many years, is our disparity in our tax code. Whether it be income taxes, whether it be property taxes, I think we'll maybe talk about that later for a little bit. The greatest hindrance to our growth and to retaining families in this area is just the lack of competitiveness in our tax code versus our neighbors across the river. Not even just, from a Carter Lake Council Bluffs perspective over in Omaha, but for all Western Iowa versus Western Nebraska, South Dakota, and to that extent, Kansas as well, too. So when it comes to Southwest Iowa or all Western Iowa and our communities here, the lack of competitiveness in our tax code is always going to put us behind the power curve to retain families, retain entrepreneurs, and grow our communities.
Well, we can certainly appreciate that. As a chamber and a member of the Chamber Alliance for the past 7 years, I can tell you that's always one of, if not our top issues, is the disparities in the income tax, and we were happy to work on that a few years ago, and we look forward to hopefully doing it again, and we'll talk about that, like you said, a little later. When you look at the statewide issue overall, you kind of covered it with the tax code, but are there other statewide issues that you think are important to be addressed, and how would you work to resolve those as well if reelected?
Well, I mean, the immediate here and now is dealing with the pandemic and finding a pathway forward here. This is not over by any stretch of the imagination. I remember looking at some readings when this thing first kicked off and kind of looking correlations between the Spanish flu, back in 1918. And if you're going to draw those correlations, this is going to be a pandemic that's going to be with us for some point in time. Even if there is a vaccine created for our ability to scale up and distribute to mass population, as well as individuals who will not take a vaccine right away for uncertainties, this is going to be at least another 6 month to 9 month event at a very minimum. So the issues that the state is going to need to address is how do we position ourselves best to try to mitigate and minimize the current environment that we're in, pandemic, and prepare ourselves for our job creators and for our families to move beyond this and try to find some normalcy and get back to their lives as much as they can, what we experienced prior to the pandemic. So I think, the top issue for the immediate near term is recovery for our state in some aspect from what we're finding right now.
And one of the good things, and maybe this touches on our next question as well, but, we did just see the budget close up on September 30th, obviously with the period they have there with the federal year ending and how there's federal dollars that come into the state as well. And I believe it was up $305 million, I believe. So that was obviously a nice piece. And it leads us well into our next question as to what is the biggest opportunity that you see for the state going forward?
Well, in some ways, you kind of read my mind there on that. So, I mean, I kind of look back to where Iowa was before the pandemic. In February, January of this year, we had the lowest unemployment rate in the entire United States, 2.5%. We had created surpluses in our budget the previous few years. We had delivered on tax reform. We were in as good as economic shape as we had been in many years. Then the pandemic hit, obviously, and everything. But through the pandemic, there are green shoots in here from an economic standpoint here within Iowa. Not too long ago in August, the CSG they partnered with a nonpartisan accounting group. They did an assessment of each and every individual state's financial and fiscal status, whether it be, your pension solvency, your budget deficits, things along those lines. Iowa tied for the top spot for states able to successfully navigate this current economic environment we're in with the pandemic. And like you said here earlier on, just this last month, even moving forward from August to now, and it's kind of, amazing to me the resiliency of Iowa's economy in some aspect that we shut our economy down for a few months here at the beginning of the year. And even shutting it down, we had managed our balance sheet with such fiscal discipline that we still generated a $305 million surplus. Now, there is going to be some uncertainty going forward here in this next budget cycle, depending on how long we remain at a fraction of the economic output that we were, because we still have businesses that are closed down right now. We still have businesses that are feeling dramatic impact, and some are being very successful there. But as soon as we're able to push through this pandemic, other states are going to be digging out of a hole for many years because they basically mismanaged their economic, balance sheets. We are as prime position as ever to actually accelerate out of this. So with that surplus, there's a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of opportunities to invest in Iowa. We have to look at where our weaknesses might have been throughout this. Broadband, that would be one thing there, especially in the rural and Western Iowa aspects, things along those lines. We have to ask ourselves, is there opportunities when we accelerate out there to double down and triple down some of those investments and better prepare for other situations down the road? Speaking of roads, we constantly hear about roads, bridges, things along those lines too. Is there an opportunity to actually accelerate out of this pandemic and actually invest in some infrastructure, things along those lines, or water quality things to actually put us ahead of our counterparts? So, a few years down the road, while they're just getting back up to normal, we will have not only pushed past that, but we'll be thriving.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with a lot of the things you just said. Obviously in Council Bluffs, we're very keenly aware of the impacts of transportation infrastructure with the vast improvements that have been made at the 80-29. And I know that goes to a lot of the lobbying and advocacy that was done and people in your office and others, on the Transportation Commission and such over the years. But you mentioned broadband as well. That's always one of our top issues. That's something, obviously, it's really been highlighted here. And I know there was some money put towards that from some of the CARES Act dollars and some of that money that the governor had some flexibility given by you and your colleagues as well once the pandemic started. But that's always an issue we're looking at too, is trying to expand broadband. And like I said, that's really been, attention has been drawn to it as we go through the pandemic. So hopefully, not only working with the large telecommunication companies, but also, the rural co-ops, because they're providing really good service also as well out in the rural areas. Hopefully we can see some things happen there.
Yep, absolutely. And that's going to, with those opportunities on broadband in particular, that's going to create quite a few conversations as well, too. Because like you said, Iowa doesn't have a one-size-fits-all tapestry of how some of our infrastructure works, whether it be the small munis, whether it be, the private sector, so on and so forth. It's when you expand government spending in those areas, there's a lot of opportunity, but a lot of opportunity for some friction too. So it'll be quite the challenge. But again, with challenge creates opportunities down the road to do some great things. So.
Oh yeah, definitely, especially when you're looking at leveraging both local, state, and federal dollars potentially. And when you look at continuing to work in this position if reelected, how would you work with and incorporate the chamber and business community into your daily offerings and your daily activities as a state senator?
Well, I guess I would continue to do what I have done thus far. I think one of the things I pride myself on in the previous 4 years is, well, I guess two things. Is one, I'm always asking chamber as well as business members, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Right. Because quite frankly, from a government standpoint, you could sit and look at monthly statistics, what revenues are doing. You can look at any metric out there and you might have a 30,000-foot view, but a lot of things get lost between that 30,000-foot view and what's actually happening on the ground. Because what's happening on the ground is what businesses are doing. They're delivering a service every day. They're hiring, in some cases they might have to let persons go or whatnot. Those stories on the ground is, probably what informs me more than anything else. And that's why I try to take to Des Moines is, real people's and real businesses, experiences and examples. And when we do make policy, how that translates, into positively affecting them or potentially negatively affecting them. One of the things too that, I think we've done a fairly good job the last few years, particularly working with the chamber, is we've been able to navigate, I view one of my roles as trying to help navigate some of the bureaucracy of state government or trying to put different pieces together. We've had a few projects in the past where we can get the projects off the ground and moving forward if we can just get one department with the state to, play a little nicer, something along those lines and everything. I've been pretty proud of some of those things we've been able to do in the past, and that's what I want to try to do for going forward is help reduce the government bureaucracy and help make the bureaucracy not a bureaucracy, but actually a super highway going forward for businesses or entrepreneurs.
And that's something I would say I thank you, because especially this is my 9th week on the job, but I know we've already worked with you on some projects to make sure that you can help us with some state issues to help grow business here in the local community, and that's been so impactful. And then also your service on the business and workforce recovery task force has been really helpful as well. And that speaks directly to what you just said. Working with all the businesses from different sectors throughout the community, especially as they handle this pandemic. You've been obviously a consistent member of that group.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And when we look at some of the top policy issues for the chamber, we kind of touched on, obviously income tax reform and other tax reform, like property tax and other implications as well. Economic development assistance mechanisms, with your IEDA budget, your Iowa Economic Development Authority budget, and your tax credits and tax increment financing for some local tax benefits and assistance for development projects, placemaking initiatives. And when I say placemaking, what I really mean by that is things that you can do to provide amenities to potential citizens to attract and retain citizens and residents. And when you think of some of those key issues that we're looking at as a chamber going into the session, amongst others as well, but those are some of the key ones, how will you work with us to address those and partner once again with the business community to do so?
So a lot of those issues, we could probably spend more than a half an hour on each, covering through those things here. But I guess to answer your question, how I can work with the chamber, I don't want to just work with the chamber. I want to be a champion of those issues. One of the things I continue to pound the table on routinely around here is taxes. And I'll try to keep through a couple of those items you mentioned, but we could talk forever about each individual one. When we came into I came into office 4 years ago. In our second year in the session, we ended up passing the largest tax cut in Iowa history. And we ended up reducing everyone's income tax rate by about 5%. But there's still a ways to go. Right now, Iowa, just the income tax rate alone is at approximately 8.4%, and Nebraska is at 6.7%. If you look historically at our tax rates, Nebraska has a lower tax rate than Iowa, particularly as keen on, Carter Lake, Council Bluffs, and all of Western Iowa for over 4 decades. So at some point in time as policymakers, we have to look at ourselves and say, even with that tax cut, we still have a large disparity there. And that disparity is something that actually keeps entrepreneurs as well as business persons from growing in here, because when they look at what their capital liability is going to be in the end, they can go right across the river and find a place where they can actually not just push money towards the government, but they can actually keep some of that money and reinvest in their own business. So income tax reform is probably one of the biggest things I want to push on, because not only does it affect every Iowan family, but most of our Iowa businesses actually pay the income tax rate and not the corporate tax rate, which people might be kind of surprised to know that. But the reality is that we have very few corporations in here in Iowa. Most people are small mom and pop businesses, or maybe a little bit, a medium-sized business, but they still are, organized as an S corp. So income tax rate's a big thing for me. I think it's probably the biggest things we can do for Western Iowa to equalize our disparities with our neighbors there. On top of that, we talk about property taxes. If you look at a commercial property tax or industrial property tax that doesn't have any type of, special assistance there, an individual business owner in Carter Lake or Council Bluffs, because the way our property tax code is structured, is going to pay probably 2 to 3 times more than what they would over in Omaha. For every dollar you would have on tax, it's probably about $2.86 the last I saw over here. I mean, we're doing it to ourselves here. We have no one to blame but ourselves. So, I want to, those are issues we have focused on. We're going to continue to focus on here going forward. So on that note, I think, the governor last year, she came out with a proposal called Invest in Iowa. And that was to try and achieve different things, which would be, a part of that would be the placemaking, trails, waterways, things along those lines there. That is not her particular recommendation. Isn't something that I would be supportive of, because the fact that it actually raised someone's sales tax in Carter Lake and Council Bluffs from 7% to 8% because we do a 1 cent option local sales tax around here. Whereas you go across the river, Nebraska is at 7.5% of their sales tax. So again, we have to be careful as what we do, because while we might try to do certain, achieve certain goals, it could actually put us behind the power curve down the road. But I do believe inside of that proposal, she had the makings of what we could, view as tax reform 2.0 here and achieve some of these other things. As opposed to raising the sales tax, here's another option. How about we eliminate some of the sales tax exemptions, because Iowa has quite a bit, where we can leave our sales tax net neutral. We can achieve I will, which was a component inside that. If we can actually plow down further and do some more substantive tax reform like we had the last 3 years. So I kind of hit a bunch of different issues there, but those are all things I think about and what the opportunities are going forward. And they're all opportunities. If we can just commit ourselves to doing holistic items as opposed to one-off short items. So, yeah.
And I appreciate you touching on all those. You're one of the few candidates I think that actually has touched on all those issues that I brought up. So I appreciate that.
Oh.
And just so we know too, Iowa is Iowa Water and Land Legacy, and it's that 3/8 of a cent sales tax increase that would go to the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. I always use a lot of acronyms too, but I always get called on it. So I'm just helping us both out here.
Oh yeah, I do the same thing too all the time. It's part of my probably my military raising a little bit. While I speak in acronyms, I forget that I need to slow down and maybe explain those for people who aren't.
I caught myself with IEDA earlier because you know what IEDA is, but a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
So the next question is, what unique skills do you bring to the position if reelected?
Well, I think one of the some of my strengths I bring to the position and skills, and I probably break it out from different parts of my biography. I've worked in county government, I worked in city government, I've worked in state government as well as in federal government, whether it be my time in the sheriff's office, my time with Council Bluffs Police Department, as my time in the military. So I've been in different vantage points, and I've seen where obstacles are at as improvements need to be made for individual persons, and how that can be a barrier to our families and our businesses around here. I just finished up my command time with the military, and I probably spent more time with logistics, personnel issues, and things along those lines there. And one of the neat things about my previous service in the military was that, in the end, it's all about people. I think that's one of the things I bring to this job as well, too, as well as my time with the police. You see people in the worst experiences in their lives. You see people at the best. And you have to realize that, when you take policy proposals and measures going forward, that, a lot of those times, those policy proposals and legislative solutions have impacts on the people in the worst times of their lives as well as the best. So I think probably a short answer to your question there is that I'm pretty blessed in life where I've seen a lot more of the human experience than maybe a lot of other people have had the opportunity to. And I think I bring that experience to the table there with my colleagues in Des Moines who maybe haven't had some of those same experiences.
And the last question we have for you is kind of one you get all the time and things like this, but why should voters cast a ballot for you on November 3rd or starting October 5th with absentee voting?
Well, I like to think that in the last 4 years that, one of our slogans up there at the Capitol is promises made, promises kept. When I ran here 4 years ago, we want to start bringing up holistic, big solutions here for not just the state, but how it impact our area. We have delivered on one of the largest tax reform packages in Iowa history. We have reorganized the way we deliver mental health services, with the caveat we need to start to bring additional funding in to build those services up. We have scaled back the size of government, as well as scaled back the size of the regulatory environment and the state code for our businesses around here. So that's what I want to do going forward, is to continue to build upon those policy initiatives, not just because it's a talking point, but we've actually delivered, and there's more work to do going forward on that. And so those are the big things as well too, but we've also very positive impacts in the, in this community around here, whether it be additional funding for the Iowa School for the Deaf, some infrastructure issues. We've made great quality of life improvements down at Lake Manawa. we've been able to actually assist the government, with modernizing our tax reform, which actually brings more revenue into the city council bluffs and Colorado Lake, on the online sales and everything. So I think we've done a great job here the last 4 years. And I think there's a lot more opportunities to push forward on those initiatives that we have started. And with the past record, I think that I just ask for everyone's support going forward. So, yeah.
Well, Senator Dawson, thank you very much. We appreciate you for taking the time to be here with us today. And again, you mentioned your service as a police officer and in the military, and thank you for your service as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks to the chamber.